morning, Rouser Radio from Lewes, East Sussex. About 2 or 3 minutes late on the air again this morning because we haven't quite figured out how to move from studio to studio without spending a little time. Mostly it's getting into the software of the program, which just allows us to play music, so we can't ignore that. Crisis? What crisis? Well, in my view, there's a leadership crisis. As if that's not as obvious as the nose on our faces. But this is Keith Hayes with Rouser Radio, broadcasting out of Lewes, East Sussex, particularly to the tiny towns that exist between Battle in the eastern part of the county to the edge of Brighton in the west, Gatwick in the north, and Tunbridge Wells in the north, and all the tiny communities in between. Of course, we didn't mention South, did we? Which takes in Seaford and Newhaven. So, welcome to the radio programme. We rant and rave, and we sort of ramble a little bit because we go from issue to issue depending upon how important we think things are, and we try hard to be as even-handed as we possibly can, which we're finding very difficult at the moment because there is so much amiss in our society, and not least of which is its leadership. And I don't care whether it's from the top to the bottom. The Conservatives are in complete disarray. Labour is starting to split. A new political party on the horizon. Oh gosh, has everybody forgotten that we had that in the sometime in the 1980s? And essentially, it goes nowhere. Nigel Farage tried it with UKIP. He seemed to be doing quite well, but then it went nowhere. And the fact of the matter is that a new political party is very difficult to establish and to set up. Better to fight from within for change. And that's the one thing that our leaders aren't doing. They're not trying to change. Nobody is trying to change the EU. Nobody says, instead of worrying about whether we've got a hard Brexit ahead or whether we're going to lose the use of Spanish tomatoes or whatever, nobody says, why basically did we want to break away? And it's because the leadership, or my reason, is the leadership of the EU isn't prepared to change. It isn't making any concessions to anything. And Mikhail Gorbachev said one of the most amazing things of his political life is why European politicians are rushing as fast as they possibly can to recreate the old Soviet Union. Well, he's right. But if you say that to people, they say, well, he was a commie, wasn't he? He was Russian, he didn't understand. Well, okay, if you want to take that view, that's fine. Although Gorbachev was a very brave man, he was a very intelligent man, and he was a very perceptive man. But be that as it may, that's my view, and other people would have other views, so they wouldn't take his words too seriously. But now George Soros, whom many people, because he was a pro-Remainer, supported, has now said more or less the same thing, is the changes in the EU have got to stop it from becoming a Soviet copy. An unelected, all-powerful central politburo with the semblance of voting and elections around it, but basically all the decisions made by a very small group of people who are accountable to nobody. That's the sort of thing that, in my view, we've got to have change. And dear old Boris, Boris is a bit like our television service, Mirador Television, and a bit like Rouser Radio, is love it or hate it, you can't forget it. And that's why we call ourselves the Marmite Station. And we internally, when we're talking about him, we talk about Boris as Mr. Marmite. He's, love him or hate him, you can never forget him. But he made a keynote speech 4 or 5 weeks ago. It was primarily aimed at sort of positioning himself to challenge Theresa May for the leadership, if he could. And he said quite bluntly, the way that we're governed is all wrong. We've got to have change from the top to the bottom. And he meant, and he said, he wasn't just talking about government or governance in Westminster. He was talking about governance right the way through the system, down to even the parish councils. And from all the evidence, it would look as if there's got to be wholesale change. Will it happen? I don't know, but at the moment, leadership is in crisis. There seems to be none locally. The county council has got itself into a complete and utter financial mess. The local council, the district council, it decided on a merger to save money, and all that's happened is that it's now got an almost unworkable system. And they get very, very sensitive about being told that. Individual people that work for the council are mostly quite charming, mostly quite helpful, mostly very perceptive, and mostly, if a little bit of fun is poked at them, they laugh and say, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Well, Town and County, the new magazine, had an article, it was an anonymous article that was written about the phone system, press 1, press 2, press 3. And that's exactly what it is. And the saga of that is that people complained almost a year ago that they couldn't get through, they couldn't talk to anybody. And if they did, they would get Eastbourne and be transferred back to Lewis and so on and so forth. I myself, on one occasion, called, got Eastbourne, lost the connection, came back to Lewis, lost the connection, walked down, spoke to a lady, came back, phoned again on her advice, only for her to pick up the phone and say, they were short of somebody, I've been transferred in the time that you spoke to me in the front office. I mean, absolute chaos, complete and utter chaos. And yesterday, one of my neighbours tried very hard to get hold of some information about planning. Well, first of all, he couldn't get through. But secondly, when he did get hold of somebody to ask questions about, is essentially they didn't know what the hell's going on. They don't really know who they talk to. And as a journalist, and there are others who are journalists here, if you want to know who you talk to as a member of the media, a member of the press in the district council, is nobody really knows. They can't really give you an answer. Somebody's putting out press releases, but there is nobody to coordinate and answer press questions, to organise press interviews, press relations with the council. There's nobody, and as a consequence, it is a broken institution. Anyway, let us go away from Labour's problems and the Conservatives' problems. Poor old Jeremy. Just 2 weeks ago, it was being said that he could become Prime Minister because if Theresa May fumbled the ball the way that she looked as if she was going to, if she fumbled the ball, that in fact he would get enough support to go to the Queen and say, you don't have to call an election, ma'am, I'm ready to form a new government. Down to such splits in his own party as it looks as if Labour is going through such trauma, one wonders as a party, will it survive? So that's the sort of leadership we've got. I think it would be rather nice if we why don't we pause and have a little bit of music? What shall we play? Well, here's one called Kiss the Sky. Let's kiss the sky and see what we can make of it. Well, that was very gentle. So if you didn't want to be rousted out of bed, I guess that's your sort of music. If you were expecting something to go boom, 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 it's not your sort of music. But one of the things that I find amusing is that apparently on somewhere in May, there is going to be a ladies' night at the White Hart, and 2-for-1 cocktails and so on and so forth. But somebody says that there is going to be 3 male strippers and a drag artist. And the comment was, are we going back to the 1980s? Well, I mean, because I'm as old as I am, I find the sort of outrage for these sort of things so funny, because prior to 1980, you probably would have found exactly the same reaction. But in the 1980s, of course, and I think it was the 1980s, the movie The Full Monty was shown. And the Full Monty is, of course, about a group of men who are out of work. Their wives are fed up with them because they're under their feet all day. The society is getting really rocked, and they don't know how to gain any money because there is simply no work around. I think it's in Sheffield or somewhere in the northeast. And so what they decide to do is that they decide to sell tickets, and what they'll do is they'll do a strip show. And of course, you go through all the traumas of ordinary blokes doing a strip show, and eventually getting down to the bare facts and showing everything they've got. And it is very amusing. And there are 2 pieces of music in it, one by Hot Chocolate, and I've forgotten the name of it, but while they're waiting in the queue at the benefits office to pick up their dole money, I suppose it was called in those days, and I suppose we still call it that today, their dole money, is that they start to dance to this until in the end they've got the entire office rocking. If only it would happen in real life, I'm quite sure we'd have much more fun. But anyway, the other thing is that they the other music that they play is from Cockney Rebel, and it's called Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile. And